Eleanor Reynolds wasn't what most people pictured when they thought of a librarian with 3 decades of experience. At 68, she carried herself with a precision that belied her age. Her silver hair was always neatly pinned back, not a strand out of place. Today, she wore a navy cardigan with her library pin, 30 years of service, fastened next to a small, almost inconspicuous anchor-shaped brooch. Her wire-rimmed glasses framed alert blue eyes that missed nothing, cataloging details with the same efficiency she'd applied to books for the past 3 decades. Those who visited the Harborview Public Library knew Ms. Reynolds as the woman who had transformed their small-town library from a dusty collection of outdated books to a vibrant community center. She'd established reading programs for children, computer literacy classes for seniors, and a veterans resource corner that had helped countless former service members navigate their benefits. Her modest appearance and soft-spoken manner masked an organizational mind that could locate any book in the building from memory and recall the reading preferences of regular patrons going back years. Marcus Hoffman, by contrast, had joined the library board just 18 months ago and muscled his way into the president position within 6 months. In his mid-50s, with an expensive haircut and a perpetual expression of mild disdain, he carried himself with the self-importance of someone who believed small-town governance was beneath him. His technology consulting business had brought him to town, and he seemed determined to make his mark on every institution within reach. As I was saying before the interruption, Marcus continued, glancing dismissively at Ms. Chun. The decision has been made. We thank Ms. Reynolds for her service, but it's time for fresh perspectives and modern approaches to library science. The other board members, a mix of longtime residents and newer additions, looked distinctly uncomfortable. Barbara Wilson, who'd been on the board for 15 years, kept glancing at Eleanor with apologetic eyes. Tom Stevens, the high school principal, studied his hands intensely. None seemed willing to challenge Marcus, whose connections to the mayor and several prominent business owners had given him outsized influence in town affairs. Eleanor stood perfectly still, her hands resting lightly on her notebook. To casual observers, she might have appeared resigned, perhaps even defeated. But there was something in her posture, a certain rigidity to her spine, a focused clarity in her gaze, that spoke of discipline rather than submission. It was the stance of someone who had weathered far worse storms than an egotistical board president with delusions of grandeur. Comment, respect, if you believe dedicated public servants deserve better than this. Marcus cleared his throat and shuffled the papers in front of him, clearly eager to move past this uncomfortable moment. Miss Chin, while your passion is admirable, this meeting has an agenda to follow. We need to discuss the transition plan and our search for a new library director with more relevant qualifications for the digital age. Eleanor finally stepped forward, her movements measured and deliberate. The room fell silent as she approached the podium. When she spoke, her voice was soft but carried unexpected authority. I'd like to understand the process by which this decision was reached, she said, her tone neutral but precise. As the library's director, I wasn't invited to participate in any performance review, nor was I made aware of concerns about my qualifications. Marcus's smile tightened. Ms. Reynolds, this isn't about performance. It's about vision. Libraries today need leadership that understands digital platforms, social media engagement, and modern information science. The board feels the board voted on this decision when, exactly? Eleanor interrupted, her gaze sweeping across the uncomfortable faces of the other members. I don't recall seeing minutes from such a meeting. A flush crept up Marcus's neck. We discussed this in executive session. Barbara Wilson shifted in her seat. Actually, Marcus, I don't remember us taking a formal vote on termination. We talked about reorganization options, but the executive committee made the final determination. Marcus cut in, his voice hardening. As is our right. Ms. Reynolds, your methods are traditional. Your master's degree in library science is from 1985, before the internet transformed information management. The digital literacy programs you've implemented are basic at best. Eleanor remained perfectly composed. I've completed continuing education requirements every year, Mr. Hoffman. Our digital archives project received state recognition last year. The interlibrary loan system I designed has been adopted by 17 libraries across the state. Projects that simply digitize old methods, Marcus dismissed with a wave of his hand. We need innovation, not adaptation. Someone who understands algorithms and engagement metrics. Like your former business associate, Mr. Craig Daniels? Eleanor asked quietly. Several gasps echoed through the room. The same consultant whose proposal to overhaul our systems would cost 3 times our annual technology budget? Marcus's face darkened. That's completely irrelevant to. The library circulation has increased 22% under my leadership, Eleanor continued, her voice still measured but gaining strength. Our community programs serve over 5,000 residents annually. We've secured grant funding that expanded our collections without burdening taxpayers. Numbers from a bygone era, Marcus snapped, losing his composure. Just like your card catalog systems and bookmending workshops. It's time to step aside for someone who isn't stuck in the 1990s, Ms. Reynolds. The insult hung in the air. Several attendees murmured in disapproval, but the board members remained silent, eyes downcast. Eleanor's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture, a subtle squaring of the shoulders, a slight lift of the chin, reminiscent of someone who had stood at attention before officers far more intimidating than Marcus Hoffman. I see, she said after a moment, her voice carrying a new edge of steel. Then I presume my termination is effective immediately? Marcus nodded, clearly relieved she wasn't going to fight further. Yes, we'll have Gloria serve as interim director until we complete our search. You can clean out your office today. Eleanor nodded once, a crisp movement that seemed oddly formal. Very well. But I should inform you that I won't be the only one receiving this news today. Before Marcus could ask what she meant, the heavy double doors at the back of the conference room swung open with purpose. The heavy double doors at the back of the conference room swung open with such authority that several people jumped. Every head turned as a tall, imposing figure in full naval dress uniform strode into the room. The overhead fluorescence gleamed off the gold braid on his shoulders and the impressive rows of medals and ribbons that adorned his broad chest. The 4 gold stripes on each sleeve marked him unmistakably as a full Navy admiral. 2 junior officers in crisp, white uniforms flanked him, their faces set in professional masks as they scanned the room. Behind them, 2 more officers in naval intelligence uniforms took positions by the doors, effectively blocking the exit. The sudden silence was absolute. Even Marcus seemed frozen, his mouth slightly open, the next dismissive comment dying on his lips. The Admiral moved with purpose, his polished shoes clicking sharply against the linoleum floor. He made no acknowledgement of the board or the spectators as he approached Eleanor Reynolds directly. His weathered face was stern, eyes sharp with contained anger. When he reached her, he stopped and executed a perfect, formal salute. "Lieutenant Commander Reynolds," he said, his deep voice carrying throughout the room. "It's an honor to see you again, ma'am." Eleanor returned the salute with flawless military precision, her transformation from mild-mannered librarian to naval officer happening in an instant before the stunned audience. "Admiral Thornton," she acknowledged with a slight nod. "This is unexpected." Admiral James Thornton lowered his hand and turned to face the library board, who seemed collectively paralyzed. One of the junior officers stepped forward with a leather portfolio, which he handed to the Admiral. "I'm A.R. Admiral James Thornton, Director of Naval Intelligence Operations for the Pacific Fleet," he announced, his voice accustomed to being heard and obeyed across ship decks. "I understand you're in the process of terminating the employment of Lieutenant Commander Eleanor Reynolds, United States Navy, retired." Marcus finally found his voice, though it emerged higher than usual. This is a local library matter, sir. I'm not sure what interest the Navy would have." 25 years, Admiral Thornton cut in, his tone leaving no room for interruption. Lieutenant Commander Reynolds served in naval intelligence for 25 years before retiring to civilian life. During Operation Desert Storm, she developed the classification and retrieval systems that saved countless lives by ensuring critical intelligence reached commanders in the field within minutes instead of hours. The Admiral opened the portfolio and removed a document bearing an official Navy seal. "Her work on Project Lighthouse remains classified to this day, but I can tell you it revolutionized how our intelligence services catalog and retrieve time-sensitive information. The systems she designed are still in use at the Pentagon and Naval War College." He turned to look at Eleanor with undisguised respect. Lieutenant Commander Reynolds received the Navy Distinguished Service Medal, 2 Bronze Stars for her service in combat zones, and was personally commended by 3 secretaries of the Navy. She declined a promotion to commander that would have taken her to Washington because she preferred to serve where the action was. A murmur ran through the crowd. The teenager who had been near tears now stared at Eleanor with wide-eyed amazement. Miss Chen's expression transformed from anger to awe. After her distinguished career, Lieutenant Commander Reynolds chose to serve her community by applying her expertise in information systems to this public library. The fact that you failed to recognize the value of having a naval intelligence veteran managing your information resources speaks volumes about your competence, Mr. Hoffman. Marcus's face had lost all color. He glanced around, clearly hoping for support from his fellow board members, but found none. Barbara Wilson was staring at Eleanor with newfound respect, while Tom Stevens looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. We had no idea of Ms. Reynolds' military background, Marcus stammered. But with all due respect, Admiral, this doesn't change the library's need for modern what, exactly? The Admiral's voice cut like steel. Modern leadership? Lieutenant Commander Reynolds led intelligence teams during 2 wars. Modern information systems? She literally wrote the manual on secure information retrieval that we still use today. I'd be fascinated to hear what modern qualifications you believe she lacks. Admiral Thornton placed the portfolio on the table in front of Marcus and extracted another document. His voice took on a formal, almost ceremonial quality as he addressed the entire room. For those unaware, Lieutenant Commander Reynolds served in naval intelligence during some of the most critical operations of the past 3 decades. Her work remains so valuable that parts of it are still classified. He glanced at Eleanor with unmistakable respect. What I can tell you is that the library cataloging system she implemented here is a civilian adaptation of her military intelligence framework. A system so effective that when the Secretary of the Navy learned it was being used to organize a public library, he personally authorized its declassification for civilian use. Several gasps echoed through the room. Barbara Wilson stared at Eleanor as if seeing her for the first time. The digital archives project this board dismissed. The Admiral continued, his voice hardening. It's being studied at the Naval Academy as a model for community information management. 3 federal agencies have consulted with MS. Reynolds on adapting her methods for their own archives. He turned directly to face Marcus. Mr. Hoffman, I understand you have business connections in the technology sector. I'm curious, did you perform any due diligence before deciding that a decorated naval intelligence officer with 2 master's degrees, including one in advanced digital information systems from 2015, was insufficiently qualified to run a library? Marcus's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words emerged. The flush that had started at his neck now covered his entire face. He finally managed. I've been authorized to inform you, Admiral Thornton continued, ignoring Marcus's stuttering, that the Secretary of the Navy has been briefed on this situation. He was, to put it mildly, displeased. This community has a significant naval presence, Mr. Hoffman. The base employs over 200 civilians and contributes substantially to your local economy. One of the junior officers stepped forward and handed the Admiral another document. As of 0900 this morning, all Navy contracts with Hoffman Technology Consulting have been suspended pending review. Admiral Thornton's voice was calm but carried unmistakable authority. Additionally, the Navy's community development grants for this county are now under evaluation. A collective murmur spread through the crowd. The town's naval base was indeed a cornerstone of the local economy, and the Navy's grants funded everything from school programs to infrastructure improvements. This is outrageous. Marcus finally found his voice. You can't threaten a local government institution this way over a personnel matter. This ceased to be merely a personnel matter when you attempted to remove a decorated veteran from her position without due process, the Admiral replied. As for threats, I'm simply informing you of decisions that have already been made at levels far above mine. He turned to address the other board members directly. The Department of the Navy formally requests that this board immediately rescind its termination of Lieutenant Commander Reynolds and restore her to her position with full authority and an apology. Barbara Wilson was the first to recover. I move that we immediately reinstate MS. Reynolds and issue a formal apology, she said, her voice shaking slightly but determined. Second, Tom Stevens added quickly, not meeting Marcus's glare. Additionally, the Admiral continued, the department requests that this board's activities be suspended for a 30-day review period, during which Lieutenant Commander Reynolds will report directly to the mayor's office regarding library operations. Eleanor stood perfectly straight throughout this exchange, her expression composed but her eyes bright with something that might have been satisfaction. Marcus finally seemed to grasp the gravity of his situation. Of course, we'll reinstate Ms. Reynolds immediately. This was clearly a misunderstanding about qualifications not a misunderstanding, Mr. Hoffman. Eleanor spoke for the first time since the Admiral's arrival. Her voice was quiet, but carried the weight of someone accustomed to being heard. A deliberate attempt to replace me with your former business partner, Craig Daniels, who stands to earn substantial consulting fees from modernizing a system that already exceeds federal standards. The next morning, Harborview Public Library opened as usual at 9 o'clock. Eleanor Reynolds sat at her desk, reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed the upcoming community events calendar. The only signs of yesterday's drama were the vase of fresh flowers on her desk and the steady stream of patrons stopping by to offer words of support. Marcus Hoffman had been removed from the library board by emergency action of the town council. Barbara Wilson would serve as interim board president until new elections could be held. The local newspaper ran a front-page story about Eleanor's distinguished naval career and service to the community, with many residents expressing shock that they had never known about her military background. "I didn't serve to receive recognition," Eleanor told a group of admiring teenagers during afternoon study hour. "I served because it was important. Just like running this library is important." By lunchtime, an impromptu children's story hour had formed in the reading nook. Eleanor sat in her usual chair, surrounded by young listeners as she read from a book about courage and standing up for what's right. Parents stood in the background, watching with newfound respect. In the community room, a sign announced a new veterans support group would be meeting weekly. Next to it, a notice about a naval history lecture series sponsored by the base had appeared. Admiral Thornton returned that afternoon, this time in civilian clothes, with his grandchildren in tow for story hour. He nodded respectfully to Eleanor as they passed in the main hall. "You know," he told his grandson as they selected books together, "sometimes the most impressive people don't wear uniforms or medals where you can see them. They just quietly do important work every single day." By week's end, the Navy had established a new community outreach program based at the library. Craig Daniels' consulting proposal disappeared from consideration, and the technology budget was redirected to expanding Eleanor's already successful programs. In her 30 years at Harborview Library, Eleanor Reynolds had cataloged thousands of stories. Now, her own had become a powerful reminder about judging people by appearances and the many ways veterans continue to serve long after leaving active duty. As Eleanor told the Admiral before he left, military service teaches you to complete the mission, whatever it takes. For me, this library is still my mission. Share if you believe our veterans deserve respect no matter where they serve. The next morning, Harborview Public Library opened as usual at 9 o'clock. Eleanor Reynolds sat at her desk, reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed the upcoming community events calendar. The only signs of yesterday's drama were the vase of fresh flowers on her desk and the steady stream of patrons stopping by to offer words of support. Marcus Hoffman had been removed from the library board by emergency action of the town council. Barbara Wilson would serve as interim board president until new elections could be held. The local newspaper ran a front-page story about Eleanor's distinguished naval career and service to the community, with many residents expressing shock that they had never known about her military background. "I didn't serve to receive recognition," Eleanor told a group of admiring teenagers during afternoon study hour. "I served because it was important. Just like running this library is important." By lunchtime, an impromptu children's story hour had formed in the reading nook. Eleanor sat in her usual chair, surrounded by young listeners as she read from a book about courage and standing up for what's right. Parents stood in the background, watching with newfound respect. In the community room, a sign announced a new veterans support group would be meeting weekly. Next to it, a notice about a naval history lecture series sponsored by the base had appeared. Admiral Thornton returned that afternoon, this time in civilian clothes, with his grandchildren in tow for story hour. He nodded respectfully to Eleanor as they passed in the main hall. "You know," he told his grandson as they selected books together, "sometimes the most impressive people don't wear uniforms or medals where you can see them. They just quietly do important work every single day." By week's end, the Navy had established a new community outreach program based at the library. Craig Daniels' consulting proposal disappeared from consideration, and the technology budget was redirected to expanding Eleanor's already successful programs. In her 30 years at Harborview Library, Eleanor Reynolds had cataloged thousands of stories. Now, Her own had become a powerful reminder about judging people by appearances and the many ways veterans continue to serve long after leaving active duty. As Eleanor told the Admiral before he left, military service teaches you to complete the mission, whatever it takes. For me, this library is still my mission. Share if you believe our veterans deserve respect no matter where they serve.